silver chandeliers sparkled over Manhattan's glittering elite at the annual Huntington Charity Gala, casting prismatic reflections across the marbled floors of the Renaissance Hotel's grand ballroom. Olivia Chen, clutching her worn leather portfolio to her chest, stood frozen at the entrance, her heartbeat drowning out the elegant symphony playing in the background. For months ago, her small design studio had collapsed under mounting debts, leaving her with nothing but student loans and shattered dreams. Tonight, she had been invited to showcase her architectural designs to some of New York's wealthiest potential investors, but as she surveyed the room filled with tailored suits and designer gowns, all she felt was the crushing weight of not belonging. Preparing and narrating this type of story took us long efforts and hard work. So if you are enjoying the story, please consider subscribing to our channel. The invitation had arrived unexpectedly, a cream-colored envelope with gold embossing, requesting her presence at the exclusive Huntington Foundation charity event. She had spent her last savings on a simple black dress from a department store clearance rack, hoping it would help her blend in. But standing there now, she realized how naive that hope had been. "Name?" asked the attendant at the entrance, his eyes barely glancing up from the guest list. "Olivia Chen," she replied, her voice smaller than she intended. "I'm here for the architectural showcase." The attendant's eyes flickered with something surprise, perhaps, or doubt before he nodded curtly and gestured toward the crowded ballroom. "The showcase displays are on the Eastern Terrace. Mr. Huntington will be evaluating submissions at 9. Olivia nodded, gripping her portfolio tighter as she stepped into the lavish crowd. Crystal glasses clinked, laughter bubbled from perfectly painted lips, and conversations about summer homes in the Hamptons and winter escapes to Aspen floated around her. She moved through the crowd like a ghost, acutely aware of the sideways glances and subtle whispers that followed her. A tall woman in a crimson gown with diamonds dripping from her ears looked Olivia up and down before turning to her companion. "They'll really let anyone in these days, won't they?" The words weren't meant to be overheard, but they cut through the ambient noise with razor precision. Olivia quickened her pace, heading toward the Eastern Terrace where several display easels had been arranged. Each held architectural renderings of soaring buildings and innovative community spaces, all competing for the Huntington Foundation's annual grant. She found an empty easel labeled with her name and carefully began arranging her design's sustainable housing concepts that could transform abandoned urban spaces into affordable, eco-friendly communities. "That's interesting," came a voice from behind her. A man in his 40s with silver-streaked hair and a glass of scotch examined her renderings with obvious skepticism. "But I don't think the Huntington Foundation is interested in charity cases this year." Olivia straightened her shoulders. "It's not charity. It's sustainable design that could revolutionize urban living spaces while reducing environmental impact." The man chuckled, gesturing to a group of well-dressed people nearby. "Alexander, Catherine, come see what someone thinks the Huntington money should fund this year." A small crowd gathered, examining Olivia's designs with amused expressions that made her face burn. A woman in a midnight blue gown touched the edge of one rendering with a manicured finger. "How quaint," she said, her British accent clipping the words sharply. "But darling, the Huntingtons invest in luxury developments and high-end commercial spaces. No one wants to see." She paused, searching for words. "Recycled housing for the underprivileged." Laughter rippled through the group, and Olivia felt her chest tighten. She had poured her heart into these designs, spent countless sleepless nights perfecting them, believing they could make a real difference. Now they had become nothing more than entertainment for people who would never understand what it meant to struggle. "I need some air," she mumbled, slipping away from her display and heading toward a less crowded corner of the terrace. The Manhattan skyline glittered beyond, buildings reaching toward the night sky like concrete dreams. Once, she had believed her name would be associated with one of those towers, a testament to her vision and perseverance. Leaning against the marble balustrade, Olivia closed her eyes and took a deep breath of the cool evening air. Perhaps she should leave now, save herself further humiliation. What had she been thinking? Believing she could compete in this world of old money and established connections? They can be rather brutal, can't they? came a gentle voice beside her. Olivia opened her eyes to find an elderly woman standing nearby, dressed simply but elegantly in a classic black pantsuit. Her silver hair was pulled back into a neat bun, and her eyes, startlingly keen behind tortoiseshell glasses, studied Olivia with unexpected warmth. "I'm sorry," Olivia replied, quickly wiping away the moisture that had gathered in her eyes. "The vultures circling your display," the woman clarified, nodding toward the group still examining and commenting on Olivia's work. "They've forgotten. That innovation rarely looks familiar." Olivia gave a small, grateful smile. "Thank you. But maybe they're right. I clearly don't belong here." The older woman tilted her head. "And where exactly is here, Miss Chen? A room full of people who inherited their taste rather than developing it, or a profession that desperately needs fresh perspectives?" Olivia started. "You know my name. I make it my business to know the names of people with vision," the woman replied, extending a hand. "I'm Margaret Wilson." Olivia shook her hand, noticing the strength in the older woman's grip. "Do you work with the Huntington Foundation?" Margaret's eyes twinkled with amusement. "In a manner of speaking, tell me about your designs." For the first time that evening, Olivia felt a flicker of hope. She led Margaret back to her display, explaining her concept for modular, sustainable housing that could be constructed quickly and affordably while maintaining aesthetic appeal and environmental consciousness. "The structures use reclaimed materials where possible," she explained, pointing to various elements in her renderings. "And the community spaces are designed to foster connection rather than isolation. Too many modern developments create beautiful shells without considering the humans who will inhabit them." Margaret listened intently, asking thoughtful questions that revealed a deep understanding of both architecture and urban planning. As they talked, Olivia noticed a few of the earlier mockers glancing their way with curious expressions. "You've clearly done your research," Margaret said after Olivia finished her explanation. "But what inspired this particular approach? It's unusually human-centered for someone so young." Olivia hesitated, then decided honesty was her only currency. "In this room, I grew up in transitional housing after my parents died. For different foster homes in 6 years. None of them ever felt like they were designed for actual living, just for containing people. I always thought that if I could create spaces that actually responded to human needs, maybe it would be easier for people to feel at home, even in difficult circumstances." Margaret's expression softened, perspective born from experience, the most valuable kind. She glanced at her watch. "It's nearly 9. I believe the evaluations will be starting soon." As if on cue, a handsome man in his 30s approached the center of the terrace, clinking a spoon against a champagne glass to gather attention. Olivia recognized him from business magazines and news features. Jackson Huntington, the current head of the Huntington Foundation and CEO of Huntington Developments. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced, his voice carrying effortlessly across the space, "thank you for joining us for the 30th Annual Huntington Foundation Architectural Innovation Showcase. As you know, each year we select one visionary project to receive our grant and the opportunity to partner with Huntington Developments." The crowd murmured with anticipation. Olivia felt her palms grow damp. This was at the moment she would either break through or be definitively shut out of this world. "Before we begin the formal evaluations," Jackson continued, "I'd like to acknowledge a special guest joining us tonight. Many of you have been wondering about the absence of our foundation's matriarch at recent events." The crowd's attention shifted, and Olivia noticed several people glancing around the room with curious expressions. "It gives me great pleasure to announce that after 3 years abroad overseeing our international initiatives, my grandmother has returned to New York and joins us here tonight." A ripple of surprise and excitement moved through the crowd. Beside Olivia, Margaret straightened slightly. "Ladies and gentlemen," Jackson said, his voice filled with obvious affection, "please welcome the founder of the Huntington Foundation and the visionary behind Huntington Development's transformation into a global leader in sustainable architecture, Mrs. Margaret Huntington Wilson." The crowd erupted in applause as Margaret, the kind, unassuming woman who had been talking with Olivia for the past 20 minutes, stepped forward with a dignified nod. Olivia froze, her mind racing to process this revelation. Margaret Wilson was actually Margaret Huntington Wilson, the legendary architect and billionaire philanthropist whose work had revolutionized urban development across 3 continents. The woman who had built an empire from a single innovative design 50 years ago. The woman whose autobiography had inspired Olivia to pursue architecture in the first place. And she had just spent 20 minutes examining and praising Olivia's work. The ballroom fell silent as Margaret Huntington Wilson made her way to the center of the terrace, her simple black pantsuit suddenly appearing not modest but intentional, a statement of substance. Over show, the guests parted before her, faces transformed from casual socializing to respectful attention. Some wore expressions of shock, others of delight. But the group that had mocked Olivia's designs minutes earlier looked positively stricken. Olivia couldn't move. Her hands gripped the edge of her display easel, knuckles white, as the realization crashed over her. She had just explained her architectural philosophy to the woman whose career had defined modern sustainable design, a woman whose net worth was estimated at over $11 billion. Heat rushed to her face as she recalled her candid comments about growing up in foster care, details she rarely shared with anyone. Margaret took her place beside her grandson, her posture impeccable despite her 78 years. "Thank you, Jackson," she said, her voice clear and commanding without being loud. "It's wonderful to be back in New York, though I must say I've been quietly observing our showcase candidates for the past hour, and I'm most impressed with the evolution of thought I'm seeing in this year's submissions." Her keen eyes scanned the crowd, momentarily connecting with Olivia's stunned gaze. A slight smile crossed her lips before she continued. "When I established this foundation 30 years ago, I had one goal: to identify visionaries who understand that architecture isn't merely about creating buildings, it's about crafting environments that shape human experience. Today, that mission feels more relevant than ever." The crowd nodded in solemn agreement, champagne glasses held midair as they hung on Margaret's every word. Olivia noticed several people glancing between Margaret and herself, obviously noting their earlier conversation. Now, Margaret continued, "I believe we have 10 submissions to review tonight. Jackson will lead the formal evaluations, but I've already formed some rather strong opinions." Her tone was warm, but carried an undeniable authority that suggested her opinions would likely determine the final outcome. Jackson stepped forward with a tablet in hand. "We'll proceed alphabetically by designer. First, we have Adams and Associates, with their concept for a luxury retail complex in Tribeca." The evaluations began, with each architect given 5 minutes to present their concept before fielding questions from Jackson, Margaret, and 3 other judges from the foundation. Olivia watched in mounting anxiety as polished professionals delivered practiced pitches for gleaming towers and exclusive communities. Many addressed Margaret directly, emphasizing how their designs aligned with principles she had pioneered, though Olivia noticed Margaret's expression growing increasingly impassive with each grandiose claim. Meanwhile, whispers circulated through the crowd. Olivia caught fragments of conversations about Margaret's unexpected appearance, her apparent interest in the girl in the cheap dress, and speculation about why the billionaire had spent the evening incognito. The woman in the midnight blue gown who had dismissed Olivia's work now watched her with calculating eyes, clearly reassessing the situation. A waiter approached Olivia with a glass of champagne on a silver tray. "Compliments of Mrs. Penrose," he murmured, nodding toward the woman in blue. Olivia politely declined, her stomach nodded for alcohol. She needed absolute clarity for her presentation, assuming she didn't flee the ballroom first. "Chen Designs," Jackson finally announced, checking his tablet. Olivia Chen with a proposal for adaptive reuse housing in Brooklyn. The moment had arrived. Olivia took a deep breath, gathered her portfolio, and approached the center of the terrace, where the other architects had presented. Her hands trembled slightly as she placed her renderings on the display easel. But when she turned to face the judges and the assembled guests, a strange calm descended upon her. She had nothing to lose, and after the evening's revelations, nothing left to prove except to herself. "Good evening," she began, her voice finding unexpected steadiness. My name is Olivia Chen, and I'm the founder of Chen Designs. My submission reimagines abandoned warehouse spaces in Brooklyn's Sunset Park as flexible, affordable housing communities centered around shared resources and environmental sustainability. Olivia launched into her presentation, explaining how her modular approach allowed for customization based on family size and needs, while maintaining structural integrity and energy efficiency. As she spoke, she noticed Margaret's slight nod of encouragement and drew strength from it. The central innovation isn't technical, but philosophical, Olivia continued, warming to her subject. These aren't units designed to maximize profit per square foot, but spaces engineered to foster genuine community while respecting individual dignity. Each apartment features convertible spaces that adapt to changing family needs, and the communal areas include urban gardens, workshop spaces, and childcare facilities designed with input from community members. When she finished her overview, Jackson glanced at his notes. Ms. Chen, your concept is certainly idealistic, but the foundation typically invests in projects with proven revenue models. How do you propose to make this financially viable? Olivia had anticipated this question. The financial model works on 3 levels, she explained, pulling a chart from her portfolio. First, the construction costs are approximately 20% lower than conventional development due to adaptive reuse of existing structures and modular construction methods. Second, operating costs are reduced through integrated renewable energy systems and community-managed spaces. And third, a tiered rental structure allows 30% of units to be offered at below-market rates while still maintaining a 7% return on investment. She could see the crowd's surprise at her detailed financial analysis. The mockery from earlier had transformed into curious attention. Though she focused solely on the panel of judges, Margaret leaned forward. And what happens to the existing community in Sunset Park? Gentrification concerns, a valid concern, Olivia acknowledged. That's why the project includes a community stakeholder model, where current residents receive priority placement and can earn equity through various contribution options. From maintenance work to teaching classes in the community spaces, it's not just preserving a neighborhood, it's enhancing it with the participation of those already invested in its success. For the next several minutes, Olivia fielded increasingly technical questions from the judges, responding with the depth of knowledge that came from years of passionate research and personal experience. When the questions finally ended, she returned to her display, legs shaky but mind clear. The remaining presentations seemed to blur together as Olivia processed what had just happened. She had presented her vision to Margaret Huntington Wilson, her architectural hero, and held her own. Whether she won the grant or not, no one could take that moment from her. After the final presentation, Jackson announced a brief intermission while the judges deliberated. The crowd dispersed toward the bar and buffet tables, but Olivia remained by her display. Unsure what to do next, the group that had mocked her earlier now hovered at a careful distance. Their expressions transformed from derision to calculated interest. The woman in the midnight blue gown approached, hand extended. Catherine Penrose, Penrose Investments, she introduced herself, her British accent now softened with warmth that hadn't been there before. I must say, your presentation was quite compelling. We're always looking for innovative projects in the residential sector. Olivia shook her hand, maintaining a neutral expression. Thank you, Ms. Penrose. I'd love to discuss potential partnerships, Catherine continued, producing a business card from an elegant clutch, perhaps over lunch. Next week, my office has a lovely view of Central Park. Before Olivia could respond, another voice joined the conversation. I'm afraid Ms. Chen's schedule may be rather full in the coming weeks, Catherine. Margaret had appeared beside them, her presence immediately commanding Catherine's attention. The investment banker's posture straightened almost imperceptibly. Margaret, wonderful to see you back in New York, Catherine gushed. I was just telling Ms. Chen how impressed I am with her concept. Such fresh thinking. Indeed, Margaret replied with a knowing smile. Though I recall overhearing somewhat different sentiments earlier this evening. Something about recycled housing for the underprivileged. Catherine paled slightly, a simple misunderstanding. I hadn't fully grasped the scope of no explanation necessary. Margaret interrupted gently but firmly. We all occasionally fail to recognize value when it doesn't arrive in expected packaging. She turned to Olivia. Would you join me for a moment, Miss Chan? There's something I'd like to discuss before the final announcement. Without waiting for a response, Margaret guided Olivia away from the increasingly uncomfortable Catherine toward a quiet corner of the terrace. The Manhattan skyline provided a glittering backdrop as they stood side by side, looking out over the city. They're circling now that they sense potential in you, Margaret observed, nodding toward the guests who were watching them with obvious interest. Get used to it. Success attracts opportunists like porch lights attract moths. Olivia smiled despite her nervousness. I'm not sure I'd call this success yet. Success isn't defined by grants or recognition, Miss Chen. It's defined by the integrity of your vision and your persistence in pursuing it. Margaret turned to face her directly. Tell me, if you don't receive our grant tonight, what will you do? The question was unexpected, but clarifying. Olivia considered it carefully before answering. I'll find another way. This project matters too much to abandon because of one rejection. Margaret nodded, seemingly satisfied with the answer. Your designs remind me of my early work before Huntington became a household name. I see the same fundamental understanding that buildings aren't merely structures, but vessels for human experience. Your book was actually what inspired me to become an architect, Olivia admitted. I read it when I was 16, living in my fourth foster home. The way you described architecture as sculpting possibility made me see my circumstances differently. Margaret's expression softened, a genuine smile replacing her professional demeanor. I wrote that book during a particularly difficult period in my life. My husband had just passed away, and I was suddenly a single mother running a fledgling firm in an industry that barely tolerated women, let alone respected them. She gazed out at the skyline, the lights reflecting in her eyes. Sometimes I wonder if those words resonated with readers precisely because they were written from a place of struggle rather than triumph. Olivia nodded, understanding exactly what Margaret meant. The most honest architecture comes from lived experience. That's what I've always believed, and that's precisely what's missing from half the submissions tonight, Margaret said, gesturing toward the display easels. Technical proficiency without soul. Impressive renderings of empty vessels. She turned back to Olivia. But not yours. Your designs breathe. Before Olivia could respond, Jackson approached, tablet in hand. Grandmother, the judges have reached a decision. We're ready for the announcement. Margaret nodded. Thank you, Jackson. She turned to Olivia once more. Whatever happens next, remember that recognition and validation are not the same thing. One comes from others, the other must come from within. With that enigmatic statement, she returned to the center of the terrace. The crowd gathered quickly, conversations hushing as Jackson raised his hand for silence. The 10 architects lined up beside their displays, each attempting to project confidence despite the palpable tension. Olivia stood beside her renderings, hands clasped to stop them from trembling, acutely aware of the glances directed her way. Ladies and gentlemen, Jackson began, on behalf of the Huntington Foundation, I want to thank all of our finalists for their exceptional submissions each year. This decision grows more difficult as we see the evolution of architectural thought and innovation. Olivia glanced at her competitors, established architects with successful firms, designer clothing, and confident smiles. What was she doing here among them? Her simple black dress suddenly felt like a costume, a futile attempt to belong in a world that operated by rules she'd never been taught. This year, Jackson continued, we received over 100 applications, narrowed to the 10 finalists. You've seen tonight, our grant provides not only financial support, but also a partnership with Huntington Developments to bring the winning concept to reality. Margaret stepped forward, taking the microphone from her grandson. Architecture has always been about possibility, she said, her gaze sweeping across the room, about seeing what could be, rather than accepting what is. When I began my career, I was told repeatedly what couldn't be done, what wasn't possible, what wouldn't sell, what didn't fit the established paradigm. She paused and the room hung on her words. Olivia found herself holding her breath tonight. I've seen designs that expertly follow established formulas, Margaret continued. Technically impressive, financially sound, and utterly forgettable. A murmur rippled through the crowd at her bluntness. And I've seen one submission that dares to reimagine not just how we build, but how we might live. One that challenges assumptions about community, sustainability, and the very purpose of architecture itself. Olivia felt her heart pounding against her ribs. Surely Margaret couldn't be referring to her design? Yet the billionaire's gaze had settled directly on her. The Huntington Foundation is proud to announce that this year's grant recipient is Olivia Chen of Chen Designs for her visionary approach to adaptive reuse housing in Brooklyn. The room erupted in applause. Though Olivia detected notes of surprise and even dismay from some corners, she stood frozen, unable to process what had just happened. Catherine Penrose and her group clapped with fixed smiles, while other guests whispered to each other, clearly shocked by the selection of an unknown designer over established firms. Jackson gestured for Olivia to join him and Margaret at the center of the terrace. Her legs moved automatically, carrying her forward as if in a dream. Cameras flashed as she shook hands with Jackson, who handed her an envelope containing the formal grant letter. "Congratulations, Ms. Chen," he said warmly, though she detected a hint of curiosity in his eyes, as if he too was surprised by his grandmother's decision. Margaret embraced her briefly, then turned to address the crowd once more. Ms. Chen's work represents exactly the kind of thinking. The Huntington Foundation was established to support innovation that serves humanity, not merely commerce. As Margaret continued speaking about the Foundation's mission, Olivia caught snippets of whispered conversations around her. Never heard of her before tonight. Clearly caught the old woman's sentimental side. Probably reminds her of herself or some sob story. The comments stung. But Olivia stood tall, clutching the envelope that represented not just financial support, but validation of her vision. When Margaret finished her speech, guests began to approach, offering congratulations that ranged from genuinely enthusiastic to thinly veiled networking attempts. "We should discuss materials sourcing for your project," said a man who introduced himself as a sustainable building supplier. "My firm would be delighted to collaborate on the engineering aspects," offered another. Catherine Penrose reappeared, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. What a delightful surprise. "Miss Chen, we must definitely have that lunch now, I believe. Penrose Investments could bring valuable expertise to your project." Olivia thanked them all politely, but non-committally, feeling overwhelmed by the sudden attention. These were the same people who had dismissed her work in her just hours ago. Now they swarmed around her like she was the answer to their prayers, their previous disdain apparently forgotten. After nearly 30 minutes of this, Jackson rescued her, guiding her toward a quieter area of the ballroom. "They'll talk your ear off all night if you let them," he said with a conspiratorial smile. "Grandmother asked me to bring you to her private reception room when you're ready for a break." From the vultures, Olivia laughed in relief. "I'd appreciate that. This is all a bit overwhelming," Jackson supplied. "I remember my first foundation event. I was 16 and convinced everyone could tell I had no idea what I was doing. But you're a Huntington," Olivia said, surprised by his admission. Jackson shrugged. "Being born into this world doesn't make navigating it any less complicated. Sometimes it just means the expectations are higher." He led her through a discreet door at the back of the ballroom, down a corridor, and into an elegantly appointed sitting room, where Margaret was already waiting, shoes off, looking far more relaxed than she had during the formal proceedings. "Ah, there you are," Margaret said, gesturing for Olivia to sit. "I imagine you've had quite enough networking for one evening." Olivia sank gratefully into a plush armchair. "I'm not sure I said anything coherent to anyone. It's all a blur." "That's probably for the best," Margaret replied with a wry smile. "First rule of success: never make promises during celebrations." She poured tea from a silver pot into delicate china cups. "This will help clear your head." Jackson excused himself to return to the main event, leaving Olivia alone with Margaret. As the door closed behind him, a comfortable silence settled between them. Olivia sipped her tea, allowing the warmth to steady her nerves. "They don't believe I deserve to win," she finally said, voicing the thought that had been nagging at her since the announcement. Margaret set down her cup. "No, they don't. And that, Miss Chen, is precisely why you must succeed spectacularly." Her voice carried no judgment, just simple truth. "They will watch your project with microscopes, looking for any flaw, any justification for their initial dismissal." "No pressure," Olivia said with a nervous laugh. "Immense pressure," Margaret corrected. "But pressure creates diamonds. The question is whether you believe in your vision enough to withstand it." Olivia considered this, the cynical whispers, the sudden attention from people who had mocked her just hours before. The weight of the Huntington name now attached to her work. It was terrifying. Yet beneath that fear lay a deeper certainty. Her design wasn't just lines on paper. It was the culmination of everything she had lived and learned. "I do," she said finally, meeting Margaret's penetrating gaze. "This project matters beyond tonight, beyond this grant. It's about creating homes, not just housing. About building community, not just buildings." Margaret nodded, satisfaction evident in her expression. "Good. Because tomorrow, the real work begins." She reached for a folder on the side table and handed it to Olivia. "These are the preliminary contracts and project timelines. My legal team will walk you through everything, but I wanted you to have this tonight." Olivia opened the folder, her eyes widening as she scanned the first page. The grant amount was 3 times what had been publicly announced. "There must be some mistake," she said, looking up in confusion. "No mistake," Margaret replied calmly. "The public figure is for publicity purposes. The actual investment reflects what I believe will be necessary to execute your vision properly, without compromise." "I don't know what to say," Olivia murmured, stunned by the figure before her. "Say you'll use it wisely," Margaret replied, her eyes twinkling, "and that you won't let those vultures out there convince you to water down your vision to match their limited imagination." Olivia nodded, still processing the magnitude of what had just happened. The folder in her hands represented not just financial support, but a complete transformation of her circumstances. Yesterday, she had been contemplating taking a job at a corporate firm just to pay off her student loans. Now she held the means to bring her most ambitious design to life. "Why me?" she finally asked, the question that had been burning in her mind since the announcement. There were established architects out there with impressive portfolios and successful firms. Margaret considered her for a moment, head tilted slightly. 3 years ago, I stepped away from active management of the foundation to tour global architecture projects. Do you know what I discovered?" She didn't wait for Olivia to answer. That the most revolutionary work wasn't happening in gleaming offices with famous names on the door. It was emerging from unlikely places, from people who understood architecture not as a luxury, but as a necessity. She stood and walked to the window, gazing out at the Manhattan skyline. "I grew up in a coal mining town in Pennsylvania. My father died in the mines when I was 12, leaving my mother to raise 4 children on a seamstress's wages. We lived in company housing, cramped, poorly ventilated rooms that turned into ovens in summer and ice boxes in winter." Olivia listened, surprised by this personal revelation from a woman whose biography mentioned only her professional triumphs, never her origins. "I designed my first building when I was 15. Margaret continued, "A community center for the miners' families, drawn on butcher paper with my mother's sewing pencils. It had natural ventilation, common spaces for childcare, a library. No one built it, of course, but it taught me that architecture begins with lived experience, with understanding the true needs of those who will inhabit the spaces we create." She turned back to Olivia. "Your design for Sunset Park reminded me of that first drawing, not in its technical elements, but in its fundamental understanding that buildings should serve people, not the other way around. That's why I chose you, Ms. Chen, because you haven't forgotten what most successful architects eventually do, that architecture is, at its heart, a deeply human endeavor." Olivia felt a lump form in her throat. "Thank you for seeing that," she said quietly. A knock at the door interrupted their conversation. Jackson poked his head in. "Grandmother, they're asking for you both. The press wants photos, and some of the foundation board members are getting antsy about your disappearance." Margaret sighed, slipping her feet back into her shoes. Duty calls. Are you ready to face the crowd again, Miss Chen? Olivia tucked the folder into her portfolio and stood. As ready as I'll ever be. Remember, Margaret said as they walked toward the door. You belong in that room now, not because of my approval or the grant, but because your vision earned you a place there. Walk with that knowledge. The remainder of the evening passed in a whirlwind of introductions, congratulations, and interview requests. Olivia found herself standing beside Margaret and Jackson for numerous photographs, smiling until her cheeks ached. The same people who had dismissed her designs earlier now hovered nearby, eager to establish connections with the Huntington's newest PROTE acute GE acute. By midnight, exhaustion began to overtake the exhilaration. Olivia was speaking with a sustainable materials supplier when she felt a gentle touch on her arm. Margaret stood beside her, offering a subtle rescue. I believe Miss Chen has endured quite enough networking for one evening, Margaret announced to the small group that had gathered. The project details will be released through official channels next week for those interested in potential collaborations. With practiced grace, she guided Olivia toward the exit. My driver will take you home, she said when they reached the grand foyer, unless you'd prefer to call a car service. Thank you, Olivia said gratefully. I was planning to take the subway, but I'm not sure I could navigate it in my current state. Margaret looked amused. The subway, at this hour, after becoming the recipient of the largest architectural grant in New York. She shook her head slightly. Some things will need to change, Miss Chen, though I admire your practicality. Outside, a sleek black car waited at the curb. The driver opened the door as they approached. I'll have my assistant contact you tomorrow to arrange a proper meeting, Margaret said. We have much to discuss regarding next steps. Olivia extended her hand. Thank you again, Mrs. Huntington Wilson, for everything. Instead of shaking her hand, Margaret surprised her with a brief embrace. You earned this opportunity, Olivia. Now make the most of it. With that, she stepped back, nodding toward the waiting car. As the car pulled away from the curb, Olivia watched the Renaissance Hotel recede in the rear window, its golden lights glowing against the night sky. The portfolio rested on her lap, containing not just her designs, but now the means to transform them from concept to reality. She could hardly believe that just hours ago, she had stood frozen at the entrance, feeling like an imposter. The car wound through Manhattan's grid, eventually crossing the bridge into Brooklyn. Olivia gave the driver directions to her small apartment in Bushwick, suddenly self-conscious about the neighborhood's graffiti-covered buildings and the narrow staircase leading to her 5th floor. Walk up, this is fine, she told the driver, asking him to stop a block from her actual building. I can walk from here. The driver looked skeptical, but complied. Ms. Huntington Wilson instructed me to see you safely. To your door, he said as he opened her door. It's just up the street. Olivia insisted. I'll be fine. Please thank her for her generosity. After a moment's hesitation, the driver nodded. As you wish, Miss Chen. Congratulations on your award. Olivia watched the car drive away before turning toward her apartment building. The familiar neighborhood now seemed different somehow, as if she were seeing it through new eyes. The rundown buildings, the cramped spaces, the makeshift community gardens and vacant lots, all of it reinforced why her work mattered. Her apartment was dark and small, a studio with a kitchenette and a bathroom where the shower, toilet, and sink occupied the same 3 square feet of space. The rent consumed nearly half her irregular income, and yet she considered herself lucky to have found it. Now, standing in the center of the room with her portfolio clutched to her chest, Olivia felt the evening's events finally sink in. She placed the folder on her small desk and opened it again, reading through the contract details more carefully. The scope was ambitious, full renovation of an abandoned warehouse in Sunset Park, converting it into 36 housing units with shared community spaces, gardens, and workshop areas exactly as she had envisioned. The timeline gave her 18 months from design finalization to completion, with quarterly review meetings with the Huntington Foundation Board. At the back of the folder was a business card with Margaret's personal contact information and a handwritten note, Architecture isn't just about building spaces, it's about creating possibility. Don't forget why you started. Olivia traced the elegant handwriting with her finger, remembering Margaret's revelation about her own humble beginnings. The billionaire philanthropist had once been a coal miner's daughter, drawing buildings on butcher paper. Now her name adorned some of the most innovative sustainable structures around the world. The parallels weren't lost on Olivia. She thought about her own journey, the foster homes, the scholarships that had enabled her education, the nights spent working double shifts at a coffee shop to pay for architecture supplies. She had never imagined that trajectory leading to tonight, to standing beside Margaret Huntington Wilson as an equal. Equal. The word echoed in her mind. Was that how Margaret saw her? Not as a charity case or a token selection, but as someone worthy of the Huntington legacy of architectural innovation? The doubt that had plagued her throughout the evening threatened to resurface. What if she couldn't deliver? What if the whispers were right, and Margaret had chosen her out of sentimentality rather than merit? Olivia shook her head, dispelling the negative thoughts. No, her design was solid, innovative, and necessary. She had earned this opportunity through years of hard work and unwavering vision. The mockery she had endured at the gala wasn't a reflection of her abilities, but of the narrow perspective that dominated elite circles. Morning light filtered through Olivia's single window, casting golden rectangles across her drafting table. She had barely slept, spending most of the night reviewing the contract details and sketching refined versions of her concept. Coffee cups littered the small apartment, testament to her overnight creative burst. The reality of winning the Huntington grant still felt dreamlike, but the folder with Margaret's handwritten note provided tangible proof. Her phone had been buzzing since dawn, journalists seeking interviews, architects offering congratulations, contractors angling for involvement. News of her selection had spread rapidly through industry channels. Olivia had responded to only one message, a meeting request from Margaret's executive assistant. For 10 a.m. at Huntington Tower in Midtown. Olivia surveyed her limited wardrobe, settling on black trousers and a simple white blouse. Professional, but unpretentious. She couldn't afford new clothes yet, even with the grant money, which would be dispersed according to the project timeline. The irony wasn't lost on her. She was now responsible for a multi-million-dollar development while living in a cramped studio apartment with a leaky faucet. The subway ride to Midtown crystallized the contrast further. She stood holding the overhead rail, surrounded by commuters in varying states of morning dishevelment, watching the city transform from neighborhood to neighborhood. How strange that just 12 hours ago she had ridden home in Margaret Huntington Wilson's private car, and now she was back to her regular life, at least for the moment. Huntington Tower rose 68 stories above Fifth Avenue, its innovative glass facade reflecting the morning sun in prismatic patterns. The building itself was an architectural landmark, one of Margaret's signature designs from the 1990s, a pioneer in sustainable high-rise construction. When such concepts were still considered experimental, the security guard at the lobby desk examined Olivia's ID with raised eyebrows. "Chen Designs?" he asked, looking up from her business card, which listed her apartment as her office address. "Yes," Olivia replied, straightening her shoulders slightly. "I have a meeting with Mrs. Huntington Wilson." The guard's demeanor shifted immediately. "Of course, Miss Chen. Please take the executive elevator to the 65th floor. Mr. Reeves will meet you there." The executive elevator ascended smoothly, its glass wall offering breathtaking views of the city as it climbed. Olivia watched the urban landscape unfold beneath her, the same city she had always known, but from a perspective she had never experienced. The metaphor wasn't subtle. On the 65th floor, a young man in an impeccable suit greeted her. "Miss Chen, welcome to Huntington Developments. I'm Thomas Reeves, Mrs. Huntington Wilson's executive assistant. Please follow me." He led her through an open office space where architects and designers worked at sleek workstations, past glass-walled conference rooms, and finally to a large corner office with panoramic views of Central Park. Margaret sat at a circular table rather than behind the impressive desk, reviewing documents with Jackson and an older man Olivia didn't recognize. "Ah, Olivia," Margaret said, looking up with a warm smile. "Right on time. Please join us." Olivia took the empty seat, acutely aware of her simple outfit amid the bespoke suits surrounding her. Jackson nodded in greeting, while the older man studied her with open curiosity. "This is Howard Bennett, our head of operations," Margaret explained. "He'll be overseeing the practical aspects of your project implementation." Bennett extended his hand. "Congratulations on your selection, Miss Chen. Your concept has generated quite a buzz this morning." "Thank you," Olivia replied, shaking his hand firmly. "I'm eager to move from concept to construction." "As are we," Margaret said, sliding a tablet toward Olivia. "We've prepared a preliminary implementation schedule based on your proposal. I'd like your thoughts." For the next hour, they discussed timeline specifics, material sourcing, community engagement strategies, and budget allocations. Olivia was grateful for her overnight preparation. As she navigated the complex questions with confidence, Bennett initially approached her with thinly veiled skepticism, but as the meeting progressed, his posture gradually shifted from assessment to engagement. Preparing and narrating this type of story took us long efforts and hard work. So if you are enjoying the story, please consider subscribing to our channel. The community stakeholder model is particularly innovative, he acknowledged when they reached that section of the plan. Though it presents logistical challenges we haven't encountered in previous projects, that's precisely why it matters, Olivia replied. Standard development models extract value from communities. This approach creates a reciprocal relationship between the building and its inhabitants. Margaret smiled slightly at this exchange, exchanging a glance with Jackson. "I believe that's why we selected Miss Chen's proposal, Howard, for precisely these unconventional approaches." Bennett nodded, making a note on his tablet. "Fair point. We'll need to develop new protocols for the equity contribution options." By the meeting's end, Olivia had a comprehensive understanding of the next steps. Office space would be provided for her at Huntington Tower during the project. A team of engineers and architects would be assigned to support implementation, and community engagement would begin within 2 weeks. As Bennett and Jackson gathered their materials to leave, Margaret gestured for Olivia to remain. When the door closed behind them, the billionaire's formal demeanor relaxed slightly. "They'll come around," she said, noting Olivia's expression. "Howard has been with me for 30 years. He approaches every new idea with healthy skepticism. It's why he's excellent at his job." "I understand," Olivia replied. "I'd be skeptical too if I were in his position." Margaret studied her for a moment. "How are you feeling about all this? It's a significant adjustment. Yesterday, a struggling designer. Today, the recipient of our largest grant with an entire implementation team at your disposal." Olivia considered the question carefully. Honestly, overwhelmed, excited, terrified that I'll somehow fail to deliver on the promise you've seen in my work. "Good," Margaret said with surprising frankness. "Those are appropriate responses. I'd be concerned if you weren't experiencing all three." She stood and walked to the window, gazing out at the city spread beneath them. "When I won my first major commission, I vomited from anxiety every morning for a week." The admission was so unexpected that Olivia laughed, then quickly covered her mouth. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean." Margaret waved away her apology. "No need. It's funny in retrospect. The point is, discomfort accompanies growth. The question is whether you allow it to paralyze you or propel you." She turned back to face Olivia. "There's something else we need to discuss, your current living situation." Olivia tensed. Had someone reported on her humble apartment? Was it somehow inappropriate for the Huntington grant recipient to live in a 5th-floor walk-up in Bushwick? "My assistant informs me that you had our driver drop you a block from your actual address last night," Margaret continued, her expression unreadable. Yes," Olivia admitted. "My neighborhood isn't what most people would consider compatible with the Huntington image." Margaret raised an eyebrow. "The Huntington image? Luxury, sophistication, success," Olivia elaborated, feeling increasingly uncomfortable. "I see." Margaret returned to her seat. "Let me tell you something about the Huntington image, Miss Chen. My first office was half a room above a hardware store in Pittsburgh. I lived in a one-bedroom apartment with a hot plate for cooking until I was 33 years old. Because I reinvested every penny into my fledgling firm. She leaned forward slightly. I don't care where you live, but I do care that you felt the need to hide it. That suggests you believe I value appearance over substance, which is concerning. Olivia felt heat rise to her face. I apologize. I made assumptions, understandable ones, given the environment of last night's gala, Margaret acknowledged. The architecture world is riddled with superficial judgments. But within these walls, within my company, the only currency that matters is integrity and innovation. She slid a key card across the table that said, "Practical matters must be addressed. This is access to a company apartment in Brooklyn Heights. It's used for visiting architects and consultants, but it's available for the duration of your project. The location will make it easier for site visits to Sunset Park, and it includes a home office setup with all the necessary technology." Olivia looked at the key card without touching it. "I can't accept. It's not a gift." Margaret interrupted firmly. "It's a practical business arrangement. The apartment belongs to Huntington Developments. You'll be leading a significant project that requires appropriate workspace and proximity to the site. This is no different than providing you an office here in the tower." Put that way, it did seem more reasonable, though Olivia still felt the stirrings of pride resisting the offer. "I wouldn't want anyone to think I was selected for any reason other than the merit of my work." Margaret's expression softened slightly. "A valid concern. People will talk regardless. Success always generates speculation. But consider this. Your effectiveness as a project leader is what matters. Now, if a proper workspace and reasonable commute enhance that effectiveness, isn't that the professional choice?" Olivia couldn't argue with that logic. She picked up the key card. "Thank you. I appreciate the practical consideration." "Excellent," Margaret said, standing to indicate the meeting was concluding. "Thomas will show you the office space we've arranged here, and then he can take you to see the Brooklyn apartment. I suggest moving in as soon as possible. We begin community engagement sessions in Sunset Park next week." The company apartment in Brooklyn Heights exceeded Olivia's wildest expectations, occupying the top floor of a renovated brownstone. It featured floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the East River, with the Manhattan skyline creating a breathtaking backdrop. The living space flowed seamlessly into a fully equipped home office, with dual monitors, a drafting table, and state-of-the-art design software. "This is excessive," Olivia murmured as Thomas Reeves completed the tour. "Mrs. Huntington Wilson believes in providing the right tools for important work," he replied, handing her a folder containing information about the building amenities and neighborhood. "The previous occupant was the lead architect for our Singapore project. He returned to headquarters last month." After Thomas departed, Olivia walked slowly through the space, trailing her fingers along the smooth surfaces of Danish furniture and built-in bookshelves filled with architectural references. The kitchen gleamed with appliances she'd only seen in design magazines. The bedroom featured a king-sized bed with views of the Brooklyn Bridge. Everything about the apartment spoke of thoughtful design rather than ostentatious wealth. Exactly what she would expect from Margaret Huntington Wilson. Even the bathroom, with its rainfall shower and soaking tub, emphasized function alongside luxury. Olivia sat at the drafting table, looking out at the view that had surely inspired countless designs before hers. The contrast with her Bushwick studio was so stark it felt almost comical. 24 hours ago, she had been contemplating which bills to postpone. Now she was sitting in an apartment that probably rented for more per month than she had earned in the past year. She opened her laptop and spent the afternoon transferring her project files to the new system, familiarizing herself with the advanced software that would allow her to refine her designs. As evening approached, she realized she needed to retrieve her belongings from her old apartment. The subway ride to Bushwick felt like traveling backward in time. The familiar neighborhood looked different now, not because it had changed, but because she had. She noticed details she'd previously accepted as background: the crumbling infrastructure, the lack of green space, the makeshift solutions residents created to address systemic deficiencies. These were exactly the issues her Sunset Park project aimed to address, Her studio apartment seemed impossibly small when she returned to it. The ceiling that had always been low now felt claustrophobic. The bathroom she'd adapted to now seemed unworkably tiny. She packed her meager belongings, quickly mostly, clothes, books, and design materials into two suitcases and a backpack. The furniture had come with the apartment. As she handed her keys to the landlord and explained her unexpected departure, a wave of emotion caught her by surprise. For all its flaws, this cramped space had sheltered her through some of her most challenging times: the failure of her small firm, the mounting debts, the nights spent working until dawn on designs she feared would never be built. Moving up in the world, huh? The landlord commented, pocketing her keys. Good for you, Chen. Always thought you were too smart for this place. A hired car, another convenience arranged by Thomas, delivered her to the Brooklyn Heights apartment. As night fell, Olivia unpacked her belongings, hanging her modest wardrobe in the spacious closet where it occupied barely a quarter of the available space. Her architecture books, dog-eared and highlighted, found places among the pristine volumes. On the shelves, her personal items: a photo of her parents, a small jade plant she'd kept alive for 3 years, a handmade ceramic mug from a college friend, transformed the impersonal space into something that felt, if not quite like home, at least connected to her history. The next morning, Olivia arrived at Huntington Tower for her first official day. Thomas showed her to a corner office on the 60th floor, smaller than Margaret's, but still impressive, with its own drafting space and conferencing area. The project team will assemble at 10 a.m., he informed her. 7 people to start: 2 engineers, 3 architects, a sustainability consultant, and a community liaison. All have been briefed on your concept. Olivia nodded, trying to project confidence despite the flutter of anxiety in her stomach. She had never managed a team before, let alone one comprised of experienced professionals at a prestigious firm. At precisely 10 a.m., they filed in 5 men and 2 women, all carrying tablets and curious expressions. Olivia recognized their type immediately: accomplished, confident, and almost certainly skeptical about taking direction from a 28-year-old unknown who had leapfrogged the traditional career ladder. Good morning, she began, standing at the head of the conference table. I'm Olivia Chen. Before we dive into the Sunset Park project specifics, I'd like to hear from each of you: your background, expertise, and what interests you about this particular development. It was a strategic opening, establishing her leadership while acknowledging their experience. One by one, they introduced themselves, revealing impressive credentials: degrees from elite universities, experience on landmark projects, specialized knowledge that would prove invaluable to her vision. Carson Wright, the lead engineer, spoke last. 20 years with Huntington, focused on structural innovation for adaptive reuse, he said, his tone neutral but his gaze assessing. I'll be honest, Miss Chen, your design challenges conventional approaches in ways that present significant implementation questions. I'm curious how you plan to address them. The statement contained both a challenge and an opportunity. Olivia moved to the digital display wall and pulled up her refined schematics. Excellent question, Mr. Wright. Let's start with the structural reinforcement strategy for the main atrium space. She launched into a detailed explanation of her approach, annotating the drawings as she spoke. For the next 2 hours, they engaged in rigorous technical discussion. Olivia addressed challenges directly, acknowledged when team members identified valid concerns, and stood firm on elements she considered essential to the project's integrity. By the session's end, the initial skepticism had evolved into cautious, professional respect. We'll reconvene tomorrow to finalize the community engagement strategy, Olivia concluded. Our first session in Sunset Park is scheduled for next week, and I want everyone aligned on our approach. The success of this project depends as much on community buy-in as on our technical execution. As the team dispersed, Carson lingered. Interesting session, he commented. You're more prepared than I expected. Olivia met his gaze directly. I've spent years developing this concept, Mr. Wright. What I lack in corporate experience, I make up for in conviction about what this project can achieve. He nodded slowly. Conviction matters, but so does practical knowledge if you're open to it. I can help you navigate some of the implementation challenges unique to New York development. I'd appreciate that, Olivia replied, recognizing both the olive branch and the valuable resource he represented. Good. And it's Carson. By the way, if we're going to revolutionize affordable housing in Brooklyn, we should probably be on a first name basis. He extended his hand. Olivia shook it, feeling a small victory in this simple professional acknowledgement. Thank you, Carson. I look forward to working together. After the team departed, Olivia remained in her new office, reviewing meeting notes and preparing for the community sessions ahead. A knock at her door interrupted her concentration. Jackson Huntington stood in the doorway, casual in a way his formal appearance at the gala hadn't suggested. How's day one treating you? He asked, leaning against the doorframe. Surprisingly well. Olivia answered, gesturing for him to enter. Your team is impressive. They're your team now. Jackson corrected, taking a seat across from her desk. At least for this project. How are they adapting to your leadership? With professional caution. She replied honestly. Though I think we found some common ground by the end of the meeting. Jackson nodded, seeming unsurprised. They'll come around. Carson's approval alone will accelerate that process. He's something of a gatekeeper for new ideas. Around here, I gathered that, Olivia said. He offered to help with implementation challenges. That's practically a declaration of loyalty from Carson, Jackson said with a slight smile. Grandmother must have told him to play nice. Olivia frowned. Did she? Jackson studied her reaction. Actually, no, that was unfair of me to suggest. Carson makes his own judgments, always has. If he's offering support, it's because he sees merit in your work. He leaned forward slightly, which brings me to why I stopped by. I wanted to make sure you understand what you've stepped into here. What do you mean? The Huntington Foundation grant is prestigious, yes, but it also comes with intense scrutiny. Your project will be dissected by every architecture critic, real estate developer, and social policy expert in the city. Some are already questioning grandmother's decision, suggesting it was sentimental rather than strategic. Olivia tensed. And what do you think? Jackson considered his response carefully. I think my grandmother has built a billion-dollar empire by recognizing potential where others don't. Her instincts about both design and people are rarely wrong. He paused. That said, this project represents a significant departure from our typical investments, both in scale and approach. The community stakeholder model alone has our legal team working overtime to create appropriate frameworks. Are you concerned? It won't work, Olivia asked directly. I'm concerned about managing expectations, Jackson replied. Transformative ideas often encounter unexpected obstacles during implementation. The gap between architectural vision and completed structure can be substantial, especially when introducing experimental elements. His candor was refreshing, if somewhat unsettling. I appreciate your honesty, Olivia said, but revolutionary. Change doesn't come from incremental thinking. This project matters precisely because it challenges conventional development models. Jackson smiled, a genuine expression that transformed his corporate demeanor. You sound exactly like my grandmother 30 years ago. She used almost those exact words when the board questioned her first sustainable high-rise design. He stood, straightening his jacket. For what it's worth, I hope you prove the skeptics wrong. Innovation has always been the Huntington hallmark. After Jackson left, Olivia found herself reflecting on the layers of expectation surrounding her project. The grant was clearly more than just financial support. It represented Margaret Huntington Wilson's public endorsement of a specific architectural philosophy. The pressure to deliver wasn't just professional. It was also about validating Margaret's judgment. The first community engagement session in Sunset Park was scheduled for the following Tuesday evening at a local community center. Olivia spent the weekend immersing herself in neighborhood research, demographic profiles, historical context, existing community organizations, and previous development attempts in the area. She was determined to approach residents as partners rather than beneficiaries. Tuesday evening arrived with unexpected nervousness. Olivia had selected her outfit carefully, professional but approachable. Nothing that screamed corporate developer, She arrived early with Carson and Ava Martinez, the community liaison assigned to the project. We've advertised through local businesses, churches, and community boards, Ava explained as they set up display boards showing preliminary renderings. Turnout is always unpredictable for these initial sessions. Don't be discouraged if it's sparse. Ava's concern proved unnecessary. By 7 p.m., the community center was filled with nearly 100 residents, families with children, elderly couples, young professionals, and local business owners. The diversity reflected the neighborhood's character, predominantly Latino and Asian American, with a growing population of young creatives priced out of other areas. As Olivia moved through the crowd, introducing herself and listening to initial reactions to the display boards, she noticed a group of men in business attire entering the room. They seemed out of place among the casually dressed residents. Developers from Meridian Properties, Ava whispered, following Olivia's gaze. They've been trying to acquire parcels in this neighborhood for years. Their last proposal was for luxury condominiums. Why are they here? Olivia asked. Information gathering, competitive intelligence, maybe hoping the community rejects your proposal. Ava shrugged. Development in New York is blood sport, especially when billions are involved. Carson joined them, nodding toward the developers. Sharks smell blood. Word about the Huntington grant has spread. Everyone wants to know what Margaret sees in this project and in you. The observation stung, but Olivia refused to be intimidated. At precisely 7:15, she stepped to the front of the room, introducing herself and the core project concept. She emphasized that this initial session was primarily to listen, not present finished plans. This building will become part of your neighborhood, she told the gathered residents, which means its design should reflect your needs, priorities, and aspiration. We've created a framework, but the details should be shaped by those who understand this community best. The next 2 hours proved both challenging and enlightening. Residents asked pointed questions about affordability, construction disruption, and selection criteria for tenants. Some expressed skepticism about another developer promising community benefits that never materialize. Others worried about gentrification accelerating despite intentions to create affordable housing. Olivia addressed each concern directly and honestly. When she didn't have an answer, she acknowledged it rather than offering platitudes. The approach seemed to resonate. By the session's end, several community leaders had expressed cautious optimism about the project, and a dozen residents had volunteered for the ongoing design advisory committee. As the crowd dispersed, one of the Meridian developers approached. Impressive performance, he said, extending his hand. James Whitfield, VP of Development at Meridian. Olivia Chen, she replied, shaking his hand firmly. And it wasn't a performance. He smiled thinly. Everything in development is a performance, Ms. Chen. Some are just more convincing than others. He glanced around the community center. You've created quite a buzz with your Cinderella story. Unknown designer plucked from obscurity by Margaret Huntington Wilson herself. Is there a question in there somewhere, Mr. Whitfield? Olivia asked, maintaining her composure despite the condescension in his tone. Just professional curiosity. He replied smoothly. Meridian offered $15 million for this warehouse last year. The Huntington Foundation paid $22. Quite a premium for a property that requires extensive remediation. Makes one wonder what Margaret really sees in this location and in you. Olivia held James Whitfield's gaze steadily, refusing to let his implied accusations rattle her. What Mrs. Huntington Wilson sees, she said carefully, is the potential to create something transformative rather than extractive. Perhaps that's a distinction Meridian doesn't appreciate. Whitfield chuckled, but there was no warmth in it. Transformative, yes, that's the buzzword everyone's using these days. He pulled out his phone and showed her a screenshot from an architecture blog. Have you seen this morning's coverage? Mystery designer wins prestigious grant, merit or manipulation? Quite the headline. Carson stepped closer, his expression darkening. I think this conversation is over, Whitfield. Actually, I'm curious about Mr. Whitfield's concerns, Olivia interjected. Surprising both men, she kept her voice level, professional. Please, elaborate on what you think the community should know about this project. Whitfield's eyes gleamed with satisfaction at her invitation. Well, since you asked, residents should understand that experimental housing projects have a poor track record in New York. Good intentions don't guarantee good outcomes. He gestured toward the departing community members. These people deserve proven solutions, not untested theories that could leave them worse off if they fail. And Meridian's luxury condominiums would have been a proven solution, Olivia asked, arching an eyebrow. Luxury units starting at $3,000 per month in a neighborhood where median household income is $42,000 annually, market rate. Housing that generates sustainable revenue and property tax income, Whitfield countered smoothly. Unlike subsidized experiments that require ongoing foundation support to remain viable. Ava Martinez had been listening to the exchange with growing irritation. "Excuse me," she interrupted, addressing Whitfield directly. "But I've lived in this neighborhood for 15 years. Meridian's market solutions would have displaced half the families who were here tonight. Economic evolution is inevitable," Whitfield replied with a shrug. "The question is whether it's managed responsibly or sentimentally." Olivia felt her temper flare, but kept her expression neutral. "Mr. Whitfield, I appreciate your perspective, but I think we have fundamentally different definitions of responsibility. Creating housing that serves existing community needs, rather than replacing the community entirely, that's not sentiment. It's sound planning. We'll see," Whitfield said, pocketing his phone. "The real test won't be community meetings and inspirational speeches. It'll be whether your idealistic vision can survive the realities of construction deadlines, budget constraints, and regulatory requirements." He paused meaningfully, not to mention the scrutiny that comes with being Margaret Huntington Wilson's pet project. The words hung in the air like a slap. Carson stepped forward, his jaw tight. "That's enough. It's fine, Carson," Olivia said. Quietly, though her hands had clenched into fists at her sides, she looked directly at Whitfield. "You're right about one thing. This project will be scrutinized intensely. Every decision, every deadline, every dollar will be examined. But that scrutiny will also demonstrate something important, that architecture can serve communities instead of displacing them." Whitfield's smile was patronizing. Admirable confidence for someone with no track record in major development. But confidence doesn't pour concrete or navigate city permitting processes. He straightened his expensive suit jacket. "When reality sets in, and the project encounters its first serious obstacles, remember that Meridian remains interested in the property. We're prepared to offer $30 million, well above what the Huntington Foundation paid." "Not interested," Olivia replied immediately. "You might feel differently in 6 months," Whitfield said, handing her his business card despite her refusal. "Development is more complicated than drawing pretty pictures. Ask Margaret, she'll tell you that vision without execution is just expensive disappointment." With that parting shot, he rejoined his colleagues, who had been watching the exchange. With obvious interest, the Meridian team filed out of the community center, leaving behind a tension that seemed to linger in the air. "Charming fellow," Carson muttered, watching them leave. "He's not wrong about development being complicated, but his motivations aren't exactly pure." Ava nodded in agreement. "Meridian has been circling this neighborhood like vultures for years. They've made offers on 12 different properties, always way above market value. They're planning something big." "What kind of something?" Olivia asked, though she suspected she already knew. "Total transformation," Ava explained as they began packing up the display materials. "Buy up enough parcels to assemble a superblock, then build high-end residential towers. Classic gentrification playbook, displace existing residents and rebrand the neighborhood for wealthy newcomers." The implications were sobering. Olivia's project wasn't just about creating innovative housing. It was positioned as a direct challenge to a much larger development strategy. No wonder Whitfield had seemed so interested in undermining her credibility. "Does Margaret know about Meridian's plans?" Olivia asked Carson as they loaded equipment into the car. "She knows about everyone's plans," Carson replied with certainty. "Margaret doesn't invest randomly. This grant isn't just about supporting your vision, it's about establishing a different model for neighborhood development." As they drove back toward Manhattan, Olivia found herself processing the evening's events. The community response had been more positive than she'd dared hope, but Whitfield's comments had exposed vulnerabilities she hadn't fully considered. Her lack of major development experience wasn't just a professional limitation, it was a potential liability that could undermine the entire project. Her phone buzzed with a text from Thomas. Reeves, Mrs. H.W. would like to see you tomorrow at 9 a.m. Bring preliminary community feedback summary. The timing felt ominous. Had Margaret seen the blog coverage Whitfield mentioned? Was she having second thoughts about selecting an inexperienced architect for such a high-profile project? Back at the Brooklyn Heights apartment, Olivia spent the night compiling detailed notes from the community session. She documented every question raised, every concern voiced, and every suggestion offered. The process helped her focus on the positive aspects of the evening rather than dwelling on Whitfield's provocations. By dawn, she had a comprehensive report that demonstrated genuine community engagement and enthusiasm for the project's core principles. Whatever Margaret wanted to discuss, Olivia would be prepared with evidence that her approach was resonating with the people who mattered most, the residents of Sunset Park. Still, as she prepared for the morning meeting, Whitfield's words echoed in her mind. Vision without execution is just expensive disappointment. The challenge ahead wasn't just architectural. It was proving that idealism could survive the brutal realities of New York development. The next morning's meeting would determine whether Margaret still believed in that possibility, or whether the first signs of opposition had shaken her confidence in her chosen architect. Either way, Olivia was determined to demonstrate that her vision was worth defending, no matter how many James Whitfields stood in her way. Margaret's office felt different the next morning. The warm afternoon light that had characterized their previous meetings was replaced by the stark clarity of 9 a.m. fluorescence, casting sharp shadows across the mahogany conference table. Olivia arrived precisely on time, her comprehensive community feedback report printed and bound, though she noticed Margaret was already reviewing what appeared to be several newspapers and printouts. Good morning, Olivia, Margaret said without looking up from her reading. Please sit. Coffee, thank you, Olivia replied, accepting the offered cup while trying to read Margaret's expression. The billionaire's demeanor seemed more formal than before, though not necessarily hostile. Margaret finished her reading and set the papers aside with deliberate precision. I've been reviewing the coverage of your community meeting. Quite comprehensive. Reporting for a neighborhood gathering. Olivia's stomach tightened. I wasn't aware the media was there. They weren't officially, Margaret clarified. But word travels quickly in development circles, particularly when Meridian Properties sends representatives to observe a competitor's community engagement. She picked up one of the printouts. This is from the Real Estate Weekly blog. Huntington Foundation's experimental housing project faces early skepticism. Would you like me to read the relevant passages? I can imagine, Olivia said carefully. James Whitfield made his position quite clear at the meeting. Margaret's eyebrows rose slightly. Ah, so you encountered James directly. How did you find that interaction? Olivia chose her words carefully. Educational. He raised valid concerns about execution challenges, though his proposed solutions seemed to involve abandoning the project entirely in favor of luxury development. And how did you respond to his concerns? I acknowledge that the project faces significant implementation challenges, while defending the core principle that housing should serve existing communities rather than displacing them. Olivia met Margaret's gaze directly. I also made it clear that we're not interested in selling to Meridian, regardless of their offers. For the first time that morning, Margaret smiled. Good. James has been circling Sunset Park like a shark for 2 years. He's convinced that every property in the neighborhood will eventually fall to market pressures. She leaned back in her chair. Tell me about the community response. Olivia opened her report, walking Margaret through the detailed feedback she'd compiled. Residents had expressed enthusiasm for the adaptive reuse approach, particularly the emphasis on preserving neighborhood character while improving housing quality. The community stakeholder model had generated significant interest, with several families volunteering to participate in the pilot program. Mrs. Rodriguez, who runs The corner bodega offered to help design the ground floor commercial space, Olivia explained. She's operated small businesses in the neighborhood for 20 years and has specific insights about foot traffic patterns and community needs. Margaret nodded approvingly. Community input on commercial design, that's exactly the kind of integration traditional developers ignore. She made a note on her tablet. What about concerns? 3 main categories, Olivia replied, consulting her notes. First, skepticism about whether affordable units will remain affordable long-term. Second, worries about construction disruption affecting local businesses. Third, questions about tenant selection criteria and whether existing residents will actually have access. Valid concerns, Margaret acknowledged. How do you propose addressing them? Olivia had spent considerable time preparing for this question. For affordability preservation, I'm researching community land trust models that remove units from speculative markets permanently. Construction disruption can be minimized through phased development and mandatory local business impact mitigation. As for tenant selection, I want to implement a neighborhood preference system that prioritizes current residents and their extended families. Margaret was quiet for a long moment, studying Olivia with the same intensity she'd shown at the gala. Finally, she spoke. These are sophisticated solutions that go well beyond typical affordable housing approaches. Where did you learn about community land trusts? Research, Olivia admitted, and personal experience. I've lived in neighborhoods that changed rapidly around me. I understand what it feels like when your community becomes unaffordable. Personal experience, Margaret repeated thoughtfully. That's what separates your approach from more conventional affordable housing developers. You're not designing for an abstract demographic, you're designing for people like yourself. The observation was accurate, but also exposed a vulnerability Olivia hadn't fully considered. Is that a strength or a limitation? It's both, Margaret replied frankly. Personal investment drives innovation, but it can also create blind spots. The challenge is maintaining objectivity while preserving passion. Margaret stood and walked to the window, her familiar gesture of contemplation. Olivia, I need to discuss something that may affect your project timeline. Olivia felt her pulse. Quicken. What kind of something? The foundation board has requested an accelerated review process, Margaret explained. Still facing the window, typically, we conduct quarterly evaluations throughout the development period. Given the experimental nature of your project and the attention it's receiving, they want monthly progress assessments. Because of the media coverage, Olivia asked. Margaret turned back to face her. Partially, but also because 3 board members received calls from other developers questioning the grant selection process. There are suggestions that my decision was influenced by sentiment rather than analysis. The words hit Olivia like a physical blow. This was exactly what she'd feared, that her selection would be seen as Margaret's charitable impulse rather than professional judgment. Are you having second thoughts about the grant? Olivia asked directly. Absolutely not, Margaret replied with surprising firmness. But I need you to understand the pressure we're both under now. Every milestone will be scrutinized. Every delay or complication will be interpreted as evidence that the project was ill-conceived. Olivia processed this information, recognizing both the challenge and the opportunity it represented. What does the accelerated review process involve? Monthly presentations to the board demonstrating measurable progress against established benchmarks, Margaret explained, returning to her seat. Timeline adherence, budget management, community engagement metrics, and construction milestones. The first review is scheduled for next month. 1 month from now, Olivia's mind raced through everything that needed to be accomplished. That's barely enough time to finalize the design phase, let alone demonstrate construction progress, which is exactly why some board members suggested the timeline, Margaret said dryly. They're hoping you'll struggle to meet the accelerated requirements, providing justification for reevaluating the grant. The political maneuvering was more complex than Olivia had anticipated. She was caught between proving herself worthy of Margaret's confidence, while navigating institutional resistance from people who hadn't supported her selection in the first place. Who on the board is driving this? Olivia asked. Margaret hesitated. Before answering, Charles Morrison, our chairman emeritus. He's been with the foundation since its inception and has strong opinions about appropriate grant recipients. He was particularly vocal about the need for proven track records in major development projects. Olivia recognized the name from industry publications. Morrison had built his fortune developing luxury residential towers across Manhattan during the 1990s boom. His opposition to her project likely reflected both professional skepticism and philosophical disagreement with community-centered development. What's Morrison's relationship with other developers? Olivia asked, suspecting she already knew the answer.